Hi everyone, my name is Wouter. I'm the managing partner at Arinti, and in our how-to video of today we will be talking about how to define the business value of AI projects and how to discover AI projects and data science projects within your organization. So at Arinti we actually developed a methodology called the data audit. This is a methodology that we've proven, tested and used with different organizations to actually help them in their journey to become more data-driven and how they can identify data science and AI projects within their organization. This is what the typical flow of a data science project looks like, and I know this is a lot of text, so I'm quickly going to run you through it. Of course, initially you will start looking at a product need. You will start looking at where an AI or data science product can play a role within your organization. You will start researching the different techniques, algorithms, models, etc. you can use to build that product, that solution. You will go into a development phase, and finally you will deploy it within the organization so it can be used in a production environment. Now, what we typically see when organizations start with this kind of project is that they start looking immediately at the data. This is called the data exploration phase. They will dive deep into literature. They will look for existing solutions. They will set up a proof of concept to technically validate the product, and then they will start looking at scaling it up to production. And that is, according to us, a wrong way to start with this kind of projects, because you're forgetting about the two, according to us, most important steps in the data science project flow or in the data science project methodology, being firstly defining a scope and clear KPIs. How will we measure the success of this product, application, tool? You need something to validate whether it is worth keeping the investments going into the project or not. And that's exactly what you're going to do when you're looking at these KPIs and that scope. And you're going to make an architecture, a plan for the initial solution development, or that's at least how we do it. Before diving into the experimentation phase, it's definitely worth investing some time in that initial solution development, scoping the solution and defining a few KPIs to measure the success. Now, how do you do this? Well, in a pragmatic way, preferably in a profit-driven way, because we strongly believe that data science and AI projects should bring return on investment, and hopefully as soon as possible. You will start looking at use cases with preferably a low risk, but of course a high return on investment, because that's the low-hanging fruit. That's where you typically create goodwill within your organization to keep investing in this kind of projects. And of course, that's also where you can identify spillovers towards future projects as well. First of all, in this methodology that we created, we start looking at the strategic goals of an organization. How can AI-enabled technologies or AI-enabled tools help reach those overall company objectives? How can AI play a role in reaching those objectives? We typically do that with a kickoff session with some of the most important stakeholders, preferably on business and technical sides, because we believe that both disciplines play a role in this roadmap. And we do this not only with one of our data scientists, but also with a user experience expert and a strategy expert, because we believe bringing all of those disciplines together will create, I think, the clearest AI-enabled use cases. So typically the data audit will start with a kickoff session where we look at identifying your mid and long range strategic goals, and we try to map that to how AI can play a role in reaching those goals. Usually we do this in-depth interview with someone technical from our team, so a data science expert, and someone non-technical. So making sure that we bring on board those two viewpoints to hopefully identify as much AI-enabled use cases as possible. Of course, we try zooming in on a few of those business cases to identify those low-risk, high-value cases, because those are, of course, the cases where we will be focusing on. So after this kickoff session, we will start looking at a few of the AI-enabled or AI-powered business cases more in depth. We will create a report for a few of these business cases, which prioritizes the ones where we think you should get started with, based on a mapping exercise of the use cases on a high-value, low-cost quadrant, again to spot the ideal head start projects, let's say, to start that AI journey within your organization. So as a third step, we will start looking at a data inspection. And the goal of the data inspection is to create a gap analysis between the required data and the available data. I think, or we believe at Arinti that there's a lot of valuable data circulating within your organization, but it could also be useful to look at external data. Maybe there's data providers, data that you can buy or generate or collect in another way that could be useful to reach the objectives that you have in mind when looking at these AI or data science driven projects. And then a few of the questions that we will start asking during this phase, for example, is where is your data stored? Can we structure the data if it's not structured yet? Is the data complete? What's the format of your data? Is the data trustworthy? These are all things that play a crucial role when you start training the algorithms and the models. So it's very important to reflect on these things long before you start experimenting. Again, these questions are asked with the goal of creating a gap analysis between what's required and what's actually available within or outside of your organization. The goal of asking these questions is to identify potential hurdles or potential blockers for AI or data science projects, like I said, long before you go into that experimenting phase and long before you potentially start wasting time on a use case that's not worth investing time in. And then as a last step, we will start creating a roadmap for future AI projects. We believe that, of course, starting with that low-hanging fruit and those projects that are high on the low-risk, high-value quadrant should be the ones that you start with, but it's important to have a strategy and a roadmap towards future AI implementations as well, because this will impact the technical architecture, and this is something that you want to get first time right. You don't want to have to change that architecture every time you start with a new project. So to conclude, with regards to the data audit methodology, the key deliverables are first of all the business case report. Secondly, the data inspection report. Like I said, that's the gap analysis between the required and the available data and potential issues with data quality, data storage, data management, etc. And then lastly, the roadmap for future AI projects. As soon as this exercise is wrapped up, we usually get the question, okay, but what is now needed to start with this AI project? What resources do we need? We actually work with the AI project canvas. This is really focused on explaining business value of an AI project and will help organizations structure the holistic idea of the AI project. Now, like you can see on the screen, the key aspects of an AI project canvas are, of course, the value proposition. This is the central part of the project. The ingredients that you need to set it up, being data, of course, the skills that you need and the desired output, the interaction with your customers, and lastly, of course, the financing aspect. Now to start with, data will be the main element that every AI project relies on. So the better that you can explain what data you need to create that value proposition, the better for your AI project. In this phase, we will start asking questions like how much data do we actually need? Do we have a prepared data set or not? Is there a data source that we have already identified, or do we need to start looking at that? Does the data need to be labeled? Is it labeled? What's the data format that we are expecting to train our algorithms? Then secondly, we're looking at skills. For example, is this a project where language plays an important role? Then we will need to bring on board NLP experience. Is this a project more centered around vision AI? Then we need a computer vision expert, etc. This is also where we will start reflecting on non-AI profiles. For a lot of AI projects, we need a UX designer, for example, because there's a user interface that needs to be created. Sometimes we need a product manager. So we really try to reflect on which are the different profiles that we need to deliver this project end to end. And then thirdly, in this block, the output block, this really shows the key metric that we want to evaluate our project on. This helps us choose in the next step a good model, and in the first place compares or allows us later to compare the performance of different models based on that metric. An output metric could, for example, be the accuracy of the model, the precision or the recall, but it could also be more tangible for end users, like how many minutes do we want to spend on this service versus the situation we have today, as soon as we have an AI application that can help us do that. Then, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, the integration part. This covers where the AI project will fit into your current architecture and explains us how the project can be used. Is it already a fit in our current backend? Does the backend need to be adjusted? Do we need to develop microservices, for example, to make sure that it can be integrated within our current environment? Those are questions that we will help you think about in this block of the AI project canvas. Next to that, we will of course also listen to key stakeholders. We will create an overview of the decision, the most important decision makers. And then lastly, of course, because we're a big fan of creating customer-centric AI applications, we will dive into who is the customer that we are actually designing this project for. We're looking at customer groups to help us actually in the decision making throughout the development of the AI tool. And then at the bottom of the AI project canvas, like I said before, we will start looking at the financial aspect. So the costs, firstly, of course, do we need to outsource certain activities? Outsourcing labeling of data, for example, is a cost that is often forgotten. So we're looking at direct costs, but also indirect costs. And then at the revenue block, we will start looking at how the project or the AI tool or the AI-driven service will enable us to generate new income streams, hopefully. Of course, a project could also serve to reduce internal costs, but that's also something that we can quantify, and it's important to do this long before you start the development or the experimentation phase, because that's what can make sure that you're doing an investment worth your time and worth your money. So again, all of this to make sure that the return on investment of the project is clear upfront, and that can help us avoid that the AI project, gets developed, but turns out to be unuseful for your organization. So there's a few additional questions that we ask in this phase to make sure that there's a valid business case for the project. Firstly, and this may seem odd, have you tried solving this problem without AI? Is there another way of solving this problem? Also, does the estimated return on investment outweigh an approach of traditional IT or maybe even manual work. If you can quantify the return of your AI project and it doesn't outweigh the way that you're currently doing it, then maybe it's not worth your time and your money after all. Also questions like, have you considered the efforts of redeployment in the future, maintenance efforts for the system once it is live, efforts for code reviews, backups, monitoring and retraining of the system? Those are all questions that you want to ask now, long before, again, you start developing the project itself. I think that shines a bit of a light on the way that we typically try to start projects and identify projects or AI or data science driven projects within an organization. And that wraps up my talk for today. Thanks, and stay tuned for more. Bye-bye.